Hi everybody, this is Ethan, and this is another installment of screencast for Learn to Be a Developer, focused on iOS development. So today I wanted to talk about Realm, which is a new database for iOS and Android that bills itself as an alternative to Core Data. Core Data, I guess, is more of instead of a database, which is what Realm is. Core Data is actually an object graph, so you don't do a lot of the database optimizations that you normally would with something like MySQL, where you try to normalize the data and remove copies of data around. Core Data, you denormalize in order to provide a fast instantiation of objects and saving of objects, apparently. So Realm builds itself as a database with a lot of the features of Core Data from the standpoint of you get real objects and you can save real objects, and it's really easy to do. Since Core Data seems to be a huge topic, I opted to look into Realm for my solution since I didn't need a huge persistence layer for what I'm looking for right now. So you get Realm from realm.io on the web. They have a nice get started guide and a number of installation options. I went with CocoaPods. You can see here my pod file has Realm in the Evernote memory block, and then you just do a pod install or a pod update and it'll pull down. You also, if you're doing Swift, you also need to get the latest release of the Realm zip file, and in there's a Swift folder and RLM support Swift. You have to copy that to your project. Of course, here my Finder window didn't get out of the way, so I have to kind of move it around a bit. It first copies it up at the top, but then I move it down into supporting files. And make sure you copy it. You saw that I checked the copy box and have to nuke the old copy because now I copied it twice. So great. So now it's in my part of my project. The next step is to create a Realm object. So Realm objects are just normal objects that inherit from RLM object, and that kind of adds the innate persistence to it. So the fields or the properties in a RLM object descendant, in this case my Evernote note, are all declared dynamic. And this, I couldn't find any documentation about this anywhere, so I had to go looking for what dynamic means. And it's because it means that this Swift property, this variable, is actually underneath an Objective-C variable. So that's what dynamic means. So you need to do that because of the way Realm is actually built underneath, and it supports Objective-C natively. So that's why you do dynamic. And so everything here, RLM object, all of the properties here that you define here will be persisted by default. So this is my Evernote note class as it stands now. And as you can see, it has a lot more going on. I have a lot more properties in it. From before, I had one field that was a date. NSDate is one of those natively supported object types in Realm. Realm supports a subset, and you can't just throw any object in there. It has to be like an NSDate or an int or float or string, those kind of things, or another Realm object. So through some trial and error, I found that breaking out the date into year, month, day worked well for me. And I have the GUID for the note, globally unique identifier. I have the title of it, so I can store the title and display that without having to hit the network. And I also have the note ref data, which is the NS data that contains the Evernote note reference from the Evernote service, and that's for some other purposes. I won't get into that, but you can also see that I have a function hash, or a var hash value, and that is because I now implement the protocol hashable and equatable, which the implementation for the equatable operator is at the very bottom, and this is so I can store references to this object in a set or hash table, and the set and hash table, because they determine, they take the hash value of the object defined here by the hash value variable to determine where in the data structure it goes, and so you don't so each object has its own unique slot, and therefore lookups are very fast later on, because it just goes right to the position in the data structure that the hash value tells it to. So the other thing to note here, or one of the many other things to note here, is that I have a variable that's not a dynamic variable, that's note ref, and with a getter and a setter. So this is calculated. So I will create a note ref from the data that I store in Realm, or I will return nil if it doesn't exist, and then I can set it as well. So this note ref is not persisted to Realm, and you can see that in the function at the bottom that is called ignored properties. This is an overridden method from RLM object, and it returns an array of strings of the names of the properties that are not persisted. So here, the only one I'm not persisting is note ref. So it knows that. The other thing, the other overridden method right above that is also very important, and it defines the primary key. So like if you're not familiar with databases, a primary key is basically the unique value that kind of references this data. So each object should have its own unique primary key, so that one doesn't overwrite the other accidentally. Realm will implement its own primary key, usually just an incrementing integer or long. But here I wanted the primary key to be the GUID field, because that way I can look up an object of this type very quickly using the GUID. The database will make searching by its primary key very fast, and so I wanted to be able to do that, because the GUID I can get it from another object, I can get it from the Evernote service. It's easy to go back and forth, and it is unique, hence globally unique identifier. So one of the many other things to know about Realm is that the access to any of these objects has to always be done on the same thread, which was a pain in the butt during some of this development. And I can show you some of the code that uses Grand Central Dispatch, which is Apple's threading library framework, to start tasks on different threads of execution. And here, for instance, is my Evernote connector, which is my main gateway to the Evernote service. And you can see that in my find remote notes function, I first dispatch a block on the global queue, which could be anything, and any other than the main thread. And that does a lot of the going out to the network, hitting the Evernote service. But when it comes back, because I have to then update the UI from my results, I have to then dispatch another block, this time on the main thread, which is the same as the UI thread, to make sure the all the realm objects are accessed from the main thread when I update the UI. So then I can also show you another smaller example on the master view controller. I have the get notes method, which dispatches on the main queue this block that reloads the data and refreshes or ends the refreshing, and then shows the note if it's necessary. For writing to Realm, we'll go back to the Evernote connector, and you can see in the middle of my find remote notes that I create an Evernote note instance, and I fill in the properties, and then the magic happens in between the realm.begin write transaction and commit write transaction, and all this is done on the realm object, which I get from the static call to default realm on RLM realm. And that does the write. Again, this has to be done on the main queue because that's where I'm updating the UI from. So then how do I do searching? So searching is in find local notes. This is also on the main queue, as you can see, because of what I said previously. And so I get my date components that I want to search for. So I want to search for today, basically, but I don't care about what time of day. So I set up my query. Realm uses NS predicate, which is too big of a topic to go into here, but you can, Apple has great documentation, and maybe I'll do another screencast sometime on that to get more in depth, but it reads pretty well, especially with Swift, being able to insert objects into the string itself. So the magic happens here where I do Evernote note.objects where pass in my query, and then I can sort it, and I want to sort it by how, in this case, days between recalls. So if it's 1 day, since I was supposed to, if this is the first time I'm supposed to be seeing it, that shows up first, and then the notes that I have seen the most will show up last because they will be showing up like every year. And that about does it for this not so short introduction to Realm. I have not covered all topics naturally, but hopefully this will help you out, kind of get a handle on what you can do and how to do it. Just don't forget that Grand Central Dispatch, always doing stuff on the same thread trick. Really helpful.